I am standing in my bedroom at 73 years old, sorting through Harold's belongings 8 months after his funeral, when the envelope falls from his coat pocket like a ghost finally ready to speak. The paper is cream-colored and heavy, aged to the color of old tea, and my name is written across the front in Harold's careful script. This is the same handwriting that signed our mortgage papers in 1975 and wrote, "Love, Harold," on every anniversary card for 45 years. This envelope has never been opened. The seal is still intact, and as I turn it over in my hands, I notice something that makes my heart skip. The postmark is from 1995, 28 years ago. 28 years this letter has been waiting in Harold's coat pocket, and I never knew it existed. I am Dorothy Mae Kellerman, and I thought I knew everything about my husband. I thought 45 years of marriage meant no secrets, no hidden corners, no stones left unturned. But here I am, holding proof that Harold kept something from me for nearly 3 decades, and I'm terrified to discover what it might be. The house feels impossibly quiet around me. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seems to be holding its breath, waiting to see what secrets the dead can still tell the living. My hands are trembling as I hold the envelope up to the afternoon light streaming through our bedroom window, but I can't make out the words inside. All I can see is the shadow of Harold's handwriting, waiting to speak to me from beyond the grave. I am Dorothy Mae Kellerman, born Dorothy Mae Patterson in 1950 in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and I have lived in this same house on Elm Street for 42 years. Harold and I bought it when we were newlyweds, young and foolish and convinced we could make any old house into a home with enough love and elbow grease. We were right, mostly. This house has seen us through midnight feedings, when our babies were small, through teenage rebellion and college graduations, through Harold's heart attack at 58 and my breast cancer at 61. But it has also seen us through the hard times that people don't talk about at funerals. It has witnessed our fights about money during the recession of 1982, when Harold was laid off from the plant for 6 months, and I had to take a night job at the hospital to keep us afloat. It has absorbed the tension from those years when Harold drank too much, never enough to be called an alcoholic, but enough that I learned to count the beer cans in the garage and gauge his mood by the sound of his footsteps on the porch. Most of all, this house has kept the secret of our marriage's darkest chapter, the one that almost broke us apart in 1995. This is the year that's written on this envelope I'm holding. Harold was a good man, but he wasn't a perfect man. He worked at Morrison Manufacturing for 37 years, coming home every evening with calloused hands and the smell of machine oil in his hair. He was quiet, dependable, the kind of man who fixed neighbors' leaky faucets without being asked and always had exact change at the grocery store. But Harold also had a temper that could flare up like a match strike, quick and hot and dangerous if you weren't careful. I learned to be careful. I learned to read the signs. I learned to recognize the way his jaw would tighten when bills came in the mail, the way his voice would get flat and cold when he'd had a hard day at work. I learned to keep the house quiet when he needed quiet, to have dinner ready when he expected it, to choose my battles carefully because some hills weren't worth dying on. But in 1995, something changed. Harold started coming home later, sometimes not until after 9 o'clock. He said he was working overtime, but his paychecks didn't reflect the extra hours. He became secretive about phone calls, stepping out onto the porch to talk in hushed tones that carried through the screen door but never clearly enough for me to make out words. I suspected another woman. How could I not? Harold was 55 then, still handsome in his quiet way, still strong from years of physical work. I was 45 and feeling every one of those years after raising 3 children and working part-time at the library. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. I noticed the way he showered as soon as he got home, how he'd started buying new shirts and cologne that smelled different from the Old Spice he'd worn for 20 years. The worst part wasn't the suspicion itself. It was the way Harold started treating me when I asked questions. He'd never been physically violent, but his words could cut just as deep. "You're being paranoid, Dorothy," he'd say. his voice dripping with the kind of dismissive contempt that made me feel small and foolish. "Maybe if you trusted your husband instead of acting like some jealous teenager, we'd both be happier." Those words still echo in this house sometimes, especially late at night when I'm alone with my memories. Harold had a way of making me doubt myself, of making me question whether what I was seeing and feeling was real or just the product of an overactive imagination. He was so certain, so convincing in his denials that I started to believe maybe I was the problem. The children were grown by then. Susan was married and living in Des Moines, Michael was in college, and Tommy was just starting his senior year of high school. The house felt too big and too empty most evenings, just Harold and me rattling around with nothing to say to each other. I'd sit in the living room with a book, stealing glances at Harold while he watched television, trying to figure out where my husband had gone and who this stranger was who'd taken his place. I was working at the Cedar Falls Public Library then, just part-time in the children's section, but it was my sanctuary. Surrounded by picture books and storytime circles, I could pretend for a few hours that the world was still a place where good always triumphed over evil and love always won in the end. Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, noticed that I'd started staying later, volunteering for evening programs and weekend events that I'd never shown interest in before. "Everything all right at home, Dorothy?" she asked one Tuesday afternoon as I was reorganizing the Easy Reader section for the third time that week. I almost told her. The words were right there, crowding against my teeth like prisoners begging for release. But what would I have said? That I thought my husband was having an affair? That he was staying out late and being cruel when I asked questions? That I felt like I was disappearing a little more each day, becoming invisible in my own home? Instead, I smiled and said, "Everything's fine, Mrs. Henderson. I just like to keep busy. I am holding this envelope from 1995, and I can feel that terrible year rushing back like floodwater." October 15th, 1995. I remember that date because it was the day everything came crashing down. Harold had been gone since early morning, claiming he had to work a Saturday shift. But when I called Morrison Manufacturing to ask them to have him call me about Tommy's football game, the supervisor told me Harold hadn't worked a Saturday in 2 months. No overtime at all, actually. If anything, they'd been cutting back hours. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar on the wall where I'd been dutifully marking Harold's overtime days with little red X's. There were so many red X's. So many lies. I did something I'd never done before in 25 years of marriage. I went looking for evidence. I searched Harold's dresser drawers, his desk in the basement, the glove compartment of his truck. I felt like a criminal, like I was violating some sacred trust, but I also felt like I was finally waking up from a long, confused sleep. In Harold's wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, I found a business card for a place called the Blue Moon Lounge, with a phone number written in his handwriting. I'd never heard of it, but when I called information, the operator told me it was a bar on the south side of Waterloo, about 20 miles away. A bar that, according to the Yellow Pages, featured live entertainment and dancing. My Harold, who claimed he hated bars and hadn't danced with me since our wedding, was spending his evenings at a place with live entertainment and dancing. I confronted him that night when he came home at 9:30, claiming he'd been working late again. I stood in our kitchen, still wearing the apron I'd put on to make dinner that had long since grown cold, and I held up the business card. "What is this, Harold?" The look on his face was like watching a mask slip. For just a moment, I saw something raw and panicked in his eyes before his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. It was something cold and calculating and cruel. "You went through my wallet?" His voice was quiet, but there was menace in it that made me step backward. "You've been lying to me for months," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "Morrison says you haven't worked overtime at all, so where have you been going?" Harold set down his lunchbox with deliberate care, then turned to face me fully. He was still wearing his work clothes, but something about his posture made him seem like a stranger. "What I do with my time is my business, Dorothy. I work 40 hours a week to keep a roof over your head and food on this table. What I do after that is nobody's concern but mine. I'm your wife, I said, the words coming out smaller than I intended. I think I have a right to know where my husband spends his evenings. That's when Harold laughed, and it was the most chilling sound I'd ever heard. Your husband? Dorothy, you haven't been interested in being a wife for years. You think I don't notice how you turn away when I try to touch you? How you always have a headache, or you're too tired, or you need to get up early? When was the last time you made an effort to be anything more than a roommate who happens to share my bed? His words hit me like physical blows. It was true that our intimacy had suffered over the years, but that happens in long marriages. People get busy, get tired, get comfortable. I'd never thought Harold minded that much. He'd never said anything. So you're having an affair, I said, and it wasn't a question. I'm having a life, Harold said. Something you might want to consider trying yourself. The fight that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had before. Harold said things that night that I'd never heard him say, things that revealed depths of resentment and anger I'd never suspected. He told me I'd let myself go, that I was boring and predictable and sexually cold. He said he'd been thinking about divorce for years, but stayed because he didn't want to pay alimony for the rest of his life. At least Linda appreciates me, he said, and there it was. The other woman had a name, Linda, someone who appreciated him in ways that I apparently didn't. I screamed at him then, all the hurt and confusion and betrayal pouring out of me in words I'd never used before. I called him names that would have shocked our pastor, told him he was a liar and a cheat and a coward. I threw his dinner plate against the wall, watched it shatter into pieces that scattered across the linoleum floor like my life was scattering. Harold just stood there and took it, and when I finally ran out of words and breath, he shook his head like I was a child throwing a tantrum. This is exactly why I found someone else, Dorothy. Look at yourself. Listen to yourself. What man would want to come home to this? Then he walked out, just picked up his keys and walked out, leaving me standing in my kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes and the ruins of everything I'd thought I knew about my marriage. He didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. I was alone in this house for the first time in 25 years, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I called in sick to work, which I'd never done unless I was actually ill. I sat in Harold's chair and stared at the television without seeing it. I made coffee and let it get cold, made meals and threw them away uneaten. On the third day, Susan called. She could hear something in my voice that made her drive up from Des Moines without even packing a bag. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, standing in my kitchen and taking in the unwashed dishes, the clothes I'd been wearing for 3 days, the general air of despair that hung over the house like smoke. I told her everything. About Harold's lies, about the other woman, about the terrible things we'd said to each other. I cried on my daughter's shoulder like she was the mother and I was the child, and she held me while I grieved for the marriage I'd thought I had. "Maybe this is for the best," Susan said gently. "Maybe you two have just grown apart. It happens, Mom. It doesn't mean either of you is a bad person." But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't believe that 25 years of marriage, 3 children, a lifetime of shared memories and inside jokes and quiet Sunday mornings could just be thrown away because Harold was having some kind of midlife crisis. I decided to fight for my marriage. I got dressed, put on makeup for the first time in a week, and drove to the Blue Moon Lounge. It was a dive bar in every sense of the word. Dark, smoky, with sticky floors and the kind of clientele that looked like they'd been there since the Carter administration. I sat at the bar, nursing a glass of wine that tasted like it had been opened sometime in the previous decade, and waited. Harold walked in at 7:30, and he wasn't alone. Linda was everything I wasn't. Young, maybe 35, with bleached blonde hair and a figure that her tight dress displayed to maximum advantage. She hung on Harold's arm like he was some kind of catch, laughing at everything he said, looking at him with the kind of adoration I hadn't felt for any man since I was 20 years old. I watched them for an hour, watched Harold buy her drinks and tell her stories that made her laugh, watched them dance to slow songs on the tiny dance floor. Harold's hands on her waist, her head on his shoulder. They looked happy together. They looked like they belonged together. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. I didn't want Harold back. Not the way he was now. Not the man who could say such cruel things, who could lie so easily, who could make me feel small and worthless and invisible. I wanted the Harold I'd married back, but that man was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years and I'd just been too afraid to admit it. I left the bar without confronting them, drove home to this house that suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a refuge. I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of everything I wanted to do with my life, everything I'd put on hold or given up or never even considered because I was too busy being Harold's wife. I wanted to go back to school and finish my degree. I wanted to travel somewhere farther than the Iowa State Fair. I wanted to redecorate this house in colors that I liked, not the beige and brown that Harold preferred. I wanted to plant a garden full of flowers instead of just vegetables, because flowers were beautiful and beauty was reason enough. Harold came home 4 days later, looking sheepish and tired. He found me in the kitchen, making breakfast for one and reading the course catalog for the local community college. "Dorothy," he said, and his voice was different, smaller. "We need to talk." I looked up at him, this man I'd loved and lived with for 25 years, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Indifference. Not anger, not hurt, not even disappointment, just a kind of calm detachment, like I was looking at a stranger who'd wandered into my house by mistake. "Yes," I said, "we do. I am still standing in my bedroom, holding this envelope from 1995, but now I understand what it must contain. Harold wrote me a letter during those awful days when our marriage was falling apart, and for some reason, he never gave it to me." With shaking hands, I tear open the envelope and unfold 3 pages of Harold's careful handwriting. The letter is dated October 20th, 1995. That's 5 days after our terrible fight, 2 days before he came home. "My dearest Dorothy," it begins, and I have to sit down on our bed because my legs won't hold me anymore. I am sitting in a hotel room in Cedar Rapids, writing this letter because I don't know how else to say what needs to be said. I have made the biggest mistake of my life, and I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me. You were right about Linda. You were right about everything. I have been having an affair for 3 months, and I have been lying to you about where I was going and what I was doing. I have betrayed our marriage vows, our family, and most of all, you. But Dorothy, I need you to know that what I said to you that night, those terrible, cruel things, none of them were true. I said them because I was angry and scared and ashamed, and I wanted to hurt you the way I was hurting inside. I wanted to make you the villain so I could feel better about being the villain myself. You are not cold or boring or any of the hateful things I said. You are the best person I have ever known, and I am the luckiest man alive to be married to you. The problem was never you, Dorothy. The problem was me. I have to stop reading because I'm crying too hard to see the words. All these years, I've carried the memory of that fight, the echo of Harold's cruel words. Even after we worked things out, even after he ended the affair and we went to counseling and rebuilt our marriage, I never forgot the way he made me feel that night. Small, worthless, invisible. But here in this letter, Harold is telling me it was all lies, defense mechanisms, the desperate lashing out of a man who knew he was in the wrong. I wipe my eyes and keep reading. I ended things with Linda yesterday. I told her I couldn't see her anymore, that I was going to fight for my marriage and my family. She didn't take it well, but I don't care. She was never real anyway, Dorothy. She was just a fantasy, a way for me to pretend I was still young and desirable and free from responsibilities. But you are real. Our life together is real. The way you make coffee in the morning and leave it on the counter for me is real. The way you laugh at my stupid jokes is real. The way you held my hand when my father died is real. The way you look when you're reading to the children at the library is real. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, but I want to try. I want to come home, Dorothy. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for these past few months. I want to be the husband you deserve, the man you married 25 years ago. I love you, Dorothy Mae. I have loved you since the first time I saw you at the Harvest Dance in 1970. and I will love you until the day I die. I just forgot how to show it, forgot how to be worthy of the love you've always given me. If you'll have me back, I promise to be better. I promise to be honest. I promise to appreciate what we have instead of taking it for granted. I promise to dance with you again, to take you places, to make you laugh the way I used to. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm asking for one more chance to be the man you fell in love with all those years ago. All my love, always and forever, Harold. I am sitting on our bed, holding this letter that Harold wrote 28 years ago but never gave me, and I'm remembering what actually happened when he came home that day. He did come home, he did apologize, he did end the affair and agree to marriage counseling. But he never told me about this letter, never shared these beautiful words that would have healed so many wounds. Instead, we had an awkward, stilted conversation in the kitchen where Harold mumbled apologies and I accepted them because I didn't know what else to do. We went to counseling with Pastor Williams, worked through our issues with the help of a kind man who specialized in saving marriages. We learned to communicate better, to be more honest with each other, to appreciate what we had. Harold kept his promises. He did become a better husband. He did take me dancing again, started planning little trips for us, remembered to tell me I was beautiful. He became more attentive, more grateful, more aware of how precious our relationship was. But he never gave me this letter, never shared these words that would have made such a difference in how I understood our reconciliation. I think I know why. Harold was a proud man, and this letter is full of raw vulnerability, desperate honesty, the kind of emotional nakedness that would have embarrassed him. It was easier to show me through actions than through words, easier to demonstrate his love than to declare it so openly. But oh, how different things might have been if I'd had these words during those difficult months of rebuilding. If I'd known that Harold understood how wrong he'd been, that he recognized my worth, that he was fighting for us not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. I am crying again, but this time it's not from sadness. It's from a kind of retroactive joy, a happiness that spans decades. Harold loved me. He really truly loved me, and he fought for our marriage not because he had to, but because he wanted to. We had 18 more years together after 1995. 18 good years, mostly. We traveled to places we'd never been. Colorado, Maine, even a cruise to Alaska for our 40th anniversary. We became grandparents together, spoiling Susan's children and Michael's twin boys. We learned to be partners in a way we'd never been before, supporting each other through my cancer and his heart problems and all the small crises that come with growing old together. Harold died in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in February, and I woke up to find him peaceful beside me, his face relaxed and younger looking than it had been in years. The last thing he said to me was, "Good night, sweetheart," just like he'd said every night for 45 years. I thought I knew our whole story. I thought I understood the arc of our marriage, the way we'd broken and healed and grown stronger. But this letter has given me a gift I never expected. The knowledge that Harold's love for me was even deeper than I knew, that his commitment to our marriage was born not from duty but from choice. I am 73 years old, and I am learning that the people we love can still surprise us, even after they're gone. Harold kept this letter for 28 years, carried it in his coat pocket like a talisman, a reminder of the promises he made and kept. I think about all the times I saw him reach into that pocket, for his keys, for a tissue, for the peppermints he always carried. His fingers must have brushed against this envelope thousands of times, a daily reminder of the crisis that almost ended our marriage and the love that ultimately saved it. Maybe Harold kept this letter because he needed to remember those words himself. Maybe on difficult days when the ordinary stresses of life made him forget why he'd fought so hard to save our marriage, he would touch this envelope and remember. Remember that he'd chosen me, chosen us, chosen love over easy escape. I am folding the letter carefully, putting it back in its envelope, and I realize something that makes me smile through my tears. Harold did give me this letter after all. He just waited until I was ready to receive it, until I was strong enough to read it without the fresh pain of betrayal clouding my understanding. If I'd found this letter right after Harold died, when grief was still sharp and raw, I might have been angry that he'd kept it from me. I might have focused on the secret rather than the love it represented. But finding it now, 8 months later, when I'm beginning to heal and remember Harold with gratitude rather than just sorrow, now I can see it for what it really is. It's Harold's final gift to me. The knowledge that I was truly loved, deeply appreciated, worth fighting for. It's proof that our marriage wasn't just a habit or a convenience, but a choice he made every day for 28 years after writing these words. Tomorrow, I will call Susan and tell her about the letter. I will share it with her because she deserves to know how much her father loved her mother, how hard he worked to be worthy of the family he'd almost lost. I will probably frame it and hang it in our bedroom, next to the photo of us dancing at our 40th anniversary party. But tonight, I am going to put on Harold's coat, the one where I found this letter, and I'm going to sit on our front porch and watch the sunset. I'm going to remember all the good times, all the laughter, all the quiet moments of contentment that made up the real substance of our marriage. I am Dorothy Mae Kellerman, and I am a woman who was loved completely by a man who understood what he'd almost lost and spent the rest of his life grateful he'd found it again. I am a woman who fought for her marriage and won, who survived betrayal and emerged stronger, who learned that forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily choice. The letter I found in Harold's coat pocket has given me something I didn't know I needed. The assurance that our love story had a happy ending, that we got it right in the end, that the man I mourned was the same man who wrote these beautiful words in a hotel room in 1995 and then spent nearly 3 decades living up to them. I am 73 years old, and I am loved. I have always been loved, and now, finally, I have the words to prove it.